Hi, friend. This is Alex McRobs, founder of the Mindful Life Practice, and you're listening to the Sober Yoga Girl podcast. I'm a Canadian who moved across the world to the Middle East at age 23, and I never went back. I got sober in 2019, and I now live full-time in Bali, Indonesia. I've made it my mission to help other women around the world stop drinking, start yoga, and change their lives through my online Sober Girls Yoga community. You're not alone, and a sober life can be fun and fulfilling. Let me show you how. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sober Yoga Girl. I am really excited to have Matt Gardiner with me here today on the show. And Matt is another Canadian, but he's on the other side of Canada. And he is a life coach and a recovery coach and also a sound therapist. And so I'm really excited to hear more about his story and how he got to where he is today and the work he does now. So welcome, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm great, Alex. Thank you so much for having me on your show. Been looking forward to this for a while. We had a little back and forth going on Instagram as far as getting this set up. So I'm super pumped. We're going to do a little show swap as well. I can't wait to have you on my podcast as well. So thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So you are just over 3 years sober, right? Our sober dates are really close. I remember yours is
Right.
April 9th and mine is April 13th of
Yes.
2019, right?
I know. Love that, eh? So cool. Yeah. Yeah, within a few days. Yeah, so exactly. Just passed my 3 year in April, and actually my
Congratulations.
personal, thank you, my personal best a few days ago. So like July 11th was my previous personal best of whatever. I think it was like 1,188 days. So I just passed that. So I had a sobriety streak in
Congratulations.
2012 to 2015, and then had a relapse that led to some other things after that. So yeah, feels pretty good. I'd had that marked on my calendar as like this goal from when I first started
Yeah,
this current sobriety journey that I'm on, this stint, and it felt so felt so far away, but it was like the stretch goal, and now I've surpassed it, and I'm just feeling great about it. So yeah,
that's
that's great.
amazing. Congratulations. That's huge.
Thank you.
So I was
Thanks.
wondering if you could share a little bit about your life before, kind of leading up to your sober journey, the first stint that you had, and then this one now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I always go back to like my earliest memories of alcohol would be, so my dad was a drinker, a big drinker, and my uncle Paul, so that's my mom's brother. And
Hmm.
whenever they got together, it would be, for me it was like 5-year-old Matt hears them get together in the other room, and all of a sudden the volume's going up on everything. It was intriguing to me though. It was very curious to me. It was like, what is going on over there? So, they'd start not yelling at each other, but the increased volume in voice,
Yeah.
the music is getting turned up. They're laughing a lot. I'm going, what's going on over there? So I'd walk in there, and of course they would do the Matt, come over here, come over. You got to try this, and then hand me a beer, and I'd do like
Wow.
the little sip and bitter beer face, and they would laugh, and I was just, but still, it definitely got my head as far as it got my curiosity up about, okay, something is about what they're doing over there and that beverage, and so that stuck with me for sure. Fast forward a few years later, I remember just being downstairs in my basement, and being a child, using my imagination, playing house, like setting up a fort and everything down there with some cardboard boxes and different things that I had down there. And I remember putting together what I called like the liquor cabinet. I had these little bottles, and I'm like, hey, there's like my I don't know if I knew what whiskey was, but I'm like, hey, this is my liquor cabinet over here. And when I'm like, for a 7 or 8 year old kid, that seems a little bit, unusual looking back on it. And I'm like, how would I even known about that? So those are like the those key memories from early on. And I generally had a sheltered upbringing. Like my mom was a stay-at-home mom, so and it's a smaller town. Like I grew up in Prince George, British Columbia, so about 70,000 people. Very blue collar. We grew up in kind of a suburb of Prince George, so very very good, great place to grow up. There's wilderness, literally like. I'd hop the fence and I'd be like in the river valley down to the Fraser River. So just beautiful. And so, really good place to grow up. But my parents ended up getting divorced when I was 13. So I was going into high school. So high school in Prince George, though, there's no middle school. So grade 8 to 12. And so just everything going on at home, my world at that point had just completely imploded. It was revealed that my dad was like a daily marijuana user, marijuana smoker, and was drinking more than what I was led to believe he was. But so that's going on at my home life. I'm starting high school. It's like the land of the giants from my perspective. These full-grown men with mustaches and beards. They're 6 feet tall. I hadn't hit my growth spurt yet, so I was a really shy, small kid with kind of stunned look on my face showing up because I'm not really sure where my life stands at this point. Having a hard time with things, and that was prime target for bullying, right? This kind of stunned kid that's not saying anything to anybody, that's really small. So I ended up getting some taking my lumps and getting some hazing there in grade 8 for sure. And like in mid high school, I hit my growth spurt. I joined a band. I started expressing myself through music, which was huge. And that's what I'll like just pause it quickly to say. A huge part of my story has been finding music and being able to express myself in a more abstract and safe way. But getting into the band thing, me and the guys that I was playing with started reading all the rock biography books, right? So, Led Zeppelin, all these bands that are just living the crazy rock and roll lifestyle. And that's appealing to us at the time, right? We're like 16 years old. I'm like, that sounds cool. Trashing a hotel room, getting drunk. So that's how it ended up. That's where I got into the band. Very quickly became a reason or an enhancement. Then became using alcohol. So my brother, I have one older brother. He's 2 years older than me. So him and his friends would start booting for us. He'd be 18 or 19 at the time. I'm 16 is kind of when I started drinking, or experimenting with drinking. So in around that timeline, and started smoking weed a lot too at the time. And I liked the escapism of marijuana. I was using that a lot more than I was with drinking, but very quickly drinking overtook smoking weed. And even at my place of employment, I started the one job that I had for like 23 years. I got hired when I was 16 years old. And I remember feeling I was like, wow, this is real life, interesting. For example, I would show up, and if there was a sick call, and like the assistant bakery manager would call me in. He's like, hey, there's somebody sick. Can you come in and cover that shift? I'd be like, yeah, for sure. I'll be right there. So I'd leave after high school and go up there and work a shift. And as they came in, the guy would like tuck a joint in my front pocket right there on the sales floor, just like discreetly, right? But still, like, put it right in my front. He's like, thanks for doing that. That's for afterwards. Thanks for coming in tonight. I was like, holy shit, like this is real life. I didn't realize this is how the world worked, right? So that's my vision of adulthood, is like using substances. I was like, man, how the veil has been lifted. I see what reality is now, right? And all the people that I was working with, like this is, mid to late 90s, so it's kind of still a Wild West, right? So like on Christmas Eve, there's like a bottle of whiskey in the freezer and the cooler, right? And it's just a regular thing. And then partying with with these adults, these guys that are anywhere from 25 to 40 years old, and I'm like 18, 17 years old, and I'm just like, oh, this is awesome. Like I feel so adult, right? So there's these like collapsed distinctions that would occur between like mature and drinking, right? Like I was associating drinking with things that really didn't belong associated with it, which I learned much, much later. But so that was kind of like my initiation into it. And, playing music, as soon as we were getting into pubs, fast forward a couple years later after I got out of high school and was playing in bars and such, it was like the one job where they encourage you to drink on the job. Like before you start, you're the entertainment for the evening. They're paying you, yet they're like, here, drink up, like have a few beers. I'm like, okay, interesting. So to me, that's, one at the time it was wonderful. I'm like, this is great. I am a rock star, right? So yeah, I got out of Prince George as soon as I could. Nothing against Prince George. Like I say, it was a great place to grow up, but just I wanted to get to a bigger center, so I moved to Calgary for a year and then ended up in Edmonton, which is where I currently am. And Edmonton's I think it's about 1.3, 1.4 million people now. So, coming from a place that's 70,000 people, right, it's so much bigger. There's just more people, more venues, better schools. That's where I just wanted to get to a place where I could grow and expand and learn more about myself, right? So yeah, so that's where we went, and we did the band thing, and in Alberta, I found the culture between Alberta, especially at the time, like early 2000s, was very much a drinking culture versus smoking weed. So BC is still very heavy on like on marijuana usage, and it's known for that, right? So me coming over, that's where it really shifted into to me becoming like a daily drinker, as opposed to before I would be like a daily smoker and maybe on weekends. Yeah. So anyway, so that's what I took that alcohol helps me come out of my shell mentality into bigger city living. And yeah, I did that for a while. You know, very much got into the band. I was playing in a couple bands. Everything was going good. My life was leveling up. I was getting promoted at work. I bought a house with my girlfriend at the time at age 23, right before the big house boom in 2008. So in Edmonton, it was like super cheap housing, and then within a year, it had doubled and hasn't really come back since, doubled or tripled even since then. So that was really cool. But then we broke up within about a year. So there was a lot of, obviously money tied into the house. I got to stay in the house, which was great. But yeah, there was man, it's like looking back on it, all the things that happened to me when I was younger, I thought was the end. So like after I
Mhm.
broke up with her, I'm like, that's it. Like I'll never find another, a partner that'll understand me like she did. And things of that nature. Everything I felt so hard, and I was having such a hard time processing my emotions. And what I would do is just numb them. And I thought the alcohol was doing the opposite. I thought it was helping me get the feelings out, and then I would write a song about it. And in reality, it was just making me a mess. I was having just a tough time. That's about as close as I've been to being depressed in my life, I think, was at that time. Just very confused. I was getting very frustrated with how I was showing up and presenting myself. I didn't feel like I was expressing myself the way I wanted to. I felt like there was some kind of governor or fear that was holding me back from being my true self, not realizing that it probably had a lot to do with the amount of alcohol I was ingesting. And and yet in the background, things keep leveling up, and the universe is giving me these awesome opportunities, and I just couldn't get my shit together, right? And it's so I ended up getting together with my current fiance, Darcy, and so we were just a big party couple, right? So that was how we were known, and that was sort of our identity, and that was great for me, and that kicked me out of that stint of depression and loneliness that I had after breaking up with Amanda. And yeah, I remember it was about a year and a half into us being together where we had this went out to Jasper, which is a beautiful mountain town here in Alberta. And I ended up giving myself like acute pancreatitis from just like binge drinking that whole weekend. And luckily, we got back to town by the time the symptoms started showing up, because man, it was terrifying. It was very, very painful, and I really wish I wish I could say that was my my rock bottom moment, or my it really should have been, but it really wasn't. So I remember spending 3 days in the hospital. They didn't know what it was, so it was like I almost left because the lady was fairly dismissive of me. And looking back on it, I can't blame her. When I went to the emergency room, and she was just like, I explained what was going on. She was just looked me in the eye and she's like, "Joe, do you really need to be here today?" And I was like, whoa, like I'm like in the worst pain I've ever felt. Yes, I do. I need to be here. And I was in the waiting room for about 2 or 3 hours. And there's so many times I was like, you know what? Just whatever. I'll just go home and sleep this off. And I'm so, so glad I didn't. And yeah, they finally got me in, and it was about 4 hours of doing all these tests before they could give me any kind of like pain management, because you don't know what's going on. And they finally figured it out, and then gave me some morphine or whatever it was to manage my pain. Ended up being 3 IV bags to rehydrate me, and 3 days in the hospital of just staring up at the ceiling, just going, you know what? I've learned my lesson. Thank you so much. Like, this is what I needed. I will never drink again. This is a second chance. I'm 27 at the time. So within 24 hours of being out of the hospital, I have a beer in my hand at home, and Darcy's looking at me going kind of like, what are you doing? And then meanwhile, there's part of her that's also like, good. I'm kind of glad I have the old Matt back. I didn't want to have to stop drinking either. So that's how we proceeded, and we did that for a couple of years. Say my early 30s. Darcy and I split for a bit. We just decided we were going to see other people, just because we got together so young, and we just needed to get some things out of our system under the guise that we were going to get back together. And it ended up being a lot more painful of an experience than both of us thought it was going to be. And we ended up just actually having like a distinct separation, like, okay, this is it. And that was like, again, super challenging for me, especially the way that it came about. It was not my favorite time, shall we say. And, right before that, right before we actually had the distinct, okay, we're not going to speak to get, we didn't end up speaking for about a year and a half. But before that, I had a fall down a set of stairs. So I got taken to the hospital again, stitched up, and I came home. And I had about post-concussion syndrome for about 3 months after that, including that Christmas. I remember the Christmas Eve, I tried to have 2 beers, but because I was still all, you know, still having some issues with my brain and the swelling and all that, I get like a beer or two in and just puke and be like barely able to speak and slurring my speech. And it was just really messy. And so, people are getting worried about me, and I'm worried about myself. And, it was just dark time. And then coming out of that is where, like, as I'm, the cobwebs are leaving, my brain is healing, and feeling better about everything. That's when I thought Darcy and I were going to get back together. It didn't end up being the case. And that's at that point, I just put my hand up. I'm like, I can't continue on like this. And it's still in the background leading up to that. There was still, like, just got promoted to a brand new store, to open a brand new store as a bakery manager. My band just got a grant for $10,000 to record a professional album. So, like, meanwhile, everything else is just going great, but my personal life and the way that I'm presenting myself is just the opposite. And so incredibly frustrating. And so I took 5 weeks off. The first 2 weeks, I went on this massive bender under the idea that I'm like, okay, let's get this out of my system. And it was, I'm almost halfway through the 5 weeks already. And I'm going, like, I can either go move to Vancouver and just go on a big bender and this can be it, or I can at least try and get my life together here, because there is a lot to live for. There was part of me that was still like, no, come on, there's tons to live for. And so that's where I was. And I ended up calling my friend Brent, who was he had just gone through NA and AA, and we had a falling out over substance abuse, of course. And we hadn't talked in about a year, and I reached out to him, and that was like the olive branch. I'm like, Brent, can you take me to one of these things? Like, is it, and he's like, of course, yeah, absolutely. So that was super cool. And we got to the parking lot of AA, and I was like, just the energy of being in the parking lot, like, looking at people going in, I was like frightened, but also I could also feel there's a change in me. And I just said to Brent, like, I'm good. I'm cured. You know what? This was enough for me. Getting this close, I have that, like, an energetic change in me. I'm good. And, it's one of those moments where, like, if he hadn't done this, I'm not convinced that we'd be having this conversation right now, but he reached over, put his hand on my shoulder and said, like, just smiled and went, it's all good, man. Let's go in together. And, yeah, so we went in together, and it's funny because he's like this quasi celebrity, and everybody's high fiving him and hugging him, and I was like, "Whoa, this is not what I was expecting." And we just sat down, and, like, as soon as the one guy started to read just the opening, whatever he'd found in the big book, and I literally felt like a weight come off my shoulders. It was and I started. Yeah, I just started, like, tearing up, and I'm like, holy shit, like, this is where I need to be. It was like a profound, like, 180, like, just spiritually. It really felt like in a matter of seconds, I was a changed person. And and that's what's basically led me for the next 3 years, 3 months of sobriety was off of that. I continued to go to the meetings, but that's specifically that one meeting. It has a very special place in my heart, and I very vividly remember what it did to me. And just tapping into that that energy, which I call, it's like, now, as I've done the self-development, I recognize it's kind of like a yin energy, like allowing. I've been so busy being like this achiever and trying to outrun my true feelings with, like, distractions and achievements and to-do lists and crossing things off the to-do list. And if, as soon as I feel lonely, I'll pick up my phone. And these are things I realize now, but at the time I had never experienced anything like that, of just, like, everything's okay. Like you don't have to, you don't have to be always achieving and trying to do this thing and being hard on yourself and acting out of like action. Like sometimes you can just exist and just be. And so it was a profound shift for me. And it just experientially, I just learned it. I was gifted it. I believe spiritually, I was just gifted it by whoever was looking after me that day. And yeah, so the next 3 years, 3 months was like a huge period of self development for me. There was still a degree that I was hiding. Specifically, I didn't enjoy telling people that I had started going to AA. So I was protecting that from people at work. From only my really close friends knew about it, and even those people were like, "Well, you can still have a beer every now and then. You weren't that bad." Because again, I was drinking a lot in hiding, right? I would do the whole, if I went to a party, I would have a couple beers, and then I'd come home and have like 10 beers because I'm like, okay, wicked. You know, I was just so worried about like not fitting in or making an ass of myself that I would just wait. And then when I come home, I'm like, okay, here we go, crack my knuckles and just freaking down 10 beer or whatever, right? So that's kind of my pattern there. Yeah. So, coming out of that, the 3 years, 3 months, it was, relearning, redefining. The first time I went camping, I remember very distinctly as well because I used to love. I mean, I still love camping, but I used to love camping in the way that I would have like a flat of beer with me, and like as soon as I park the camper van, it's like let's do this. Start just trying to race through the flat of beers as quickly as I could, having a fire, getting rowdy, and now it's like I'm just out there and I'm just like by myself, and I have my journal and all that, and I'm just sitting there. I'm like, man, this is kind of boring. Like I'm just, and now realizing I'm like, it's one of my favorite things to do is just sit out in nature and just allow and exist and be in nature, right? But at the time I was like, wow, this is way different when you're not drinking, and all this, and even the music. Like when we ended up recording that album, that was the first time I had played any note or sing any note of music sober my entire life. Even when I was 16, I'd like smoke weed before I picked up the guitar. I believed, again, that one of these, collapsed distinctions of like inspiration and creativity and like substances, like they go hand in hand. I can't do one without the other. So that's what it was for 3 years, 3 months. And I ended up being in my drummer's wedding party. I was one of his groomsmen. And it was a great wedding. It was like about 200 people, and being at the groomsmen table, like every drink that's coming over has some kind of alcohol in it. Even the coffee, I'm like, at least I can have a coffee. There's like Kahlua in it. I'm like, damn it. Knowing now, like looking back on it, because I was about 3 years, like a little over 3 years in, 3 years, 3 months at that time, I I can honestly say that I was kind of had my eye on the door of like, the door. I left the door open just a crack, and I felt like I could kind of open and kind of peek in there again. So I could have easily just said to everybody, "Hey, I'm not drinking," and hey, which I had done at events before, but I didn't that night. In fact, I was like kind of trying it on a little bit. Like I'd have a shot come to me, and instead of just going waving it off, I would do the whole like, give it to the plant behind me. But I was still like I was like getting close. Like I was, it's kind of like, dipping your toes in the water. So finally by the end of the night, it was like midnight, I almost made it. And finally I just had a shot of tequila. And it was like instantaneous, like the brain chemistry happening. And I was just like, yeah, that kind of feels good actually. Like I kind of missed that. And I ended up getting a Corona, and I'm having a conversation with my buddy Greg, who's the bass player in the band. And it kind of turns into like the whole, oh man, like I got so much, like the whole, got so much respect for you. And like, what a great friendship we've had, getting into the, that kind of like the drunk talk. Right. And I had about a half of the Corona, and I was like, you know what? I think I'm fine with this. My sobriety is over, and I got this. I remember saying that. I got this. Really three frightening words to say in hindsight, looking back. So yeah, that's when my ego really came back in and started rejecting that one side of me that I'd really developed, that like the yin side that I'd mentioned. It was just like, nah, like don't worry about it. Like I got it. Don't like, that voice was like, what have you done? Like, I can't believe you did this. And I was just like, trust me, like I got it. And so as soon as I got home, I did all the justification things and all the different like attempts, right? So my moderation started by going, okay, well, everybody's talking about craft beer, so I'll get craft beer. That way I'm supporting local, right? Feel good about myself that way. Craft beer is like double the price of the beer I used to buy, so certainly I won't be, buying double the beer. Like that would be ridiculous, which of course I did right away. And then like I don't like warm beer, so I'll leave it out in my closet, like in the living room. And then that way it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind, and it's warm. So if I decide to have more than the one that I put in the fridge, I'm going to be drinking warm beer. I'm never going to do that, will I? Before you know it, I'm drinking like 8 warm beer. And I'm just like, what the hell am I doing? How can I not get this? So, and then fast forward, about a year after that, Darcy and I got back together. So Darcy, to her credit, had sobered up independent of me as well. So I was at about 3 years sober. She was at 2 years sober. So she was back in my life by this point. She was same thing, leveling up. She was getting promoted. Everything was great. We were eyeballing her to move back in. And it was just wonderful. It had this like, the $1 million question: would we get along independent of our alcohol use? The answer is 100%. Like it was such more nuanced relationship, true love, right? It was such an awesome experience. And it was actually me that suggested one of the nights that she got promoted, should we, would drinking enhance this tonight? And she kind of thought about it. I'm like, you know what? If we drank cider, we were never big cider people. If we have cider like that, certainly that will prevent us from having too much. And she's like, yeah, let's try it. So we walked over to the liquor store, did that. Before you know it, we're cider people, right? Because of that. And and so then we have a couple's justification. So what we're doing is we're going, okay, well, no booze in the house because we've had issues with that before. So, only when we go out. And then before you know it, we're going out five nights a week. I'm like, well, this is really expensive. Certainly we can't do this. So let's try the house again, only on the weekends. But we tried every condition, anything, any like little side deal that you could make with yourself or with each other. We tried, and and to 0% success rate, big surprise. And I knew it was catching up with you. By this time, I'm like 37 years old, right? And so the a few days before Christmas 2018, my dad passed away suddenly, and he had been drinking his pretty much since he was like 14 or 16 or whatever it was. His dad was a big drinker. His dad's dad and mom, like the great grandparents, were both heavy drinkers, Irish background, So it was very much in his family. He died, yeah, 66, which is incredibly young by today's standards. He had been retired for 1 year. He was a fireman and had a great retirement, ready for himself. 35 years working for the city, massive pension, all the rest. So he was set up. But yeah, he had a hard time with it. He took up smoking cigarettes as well, in retirement, and yeah, it caught up with him. So he passed away, and that was like, you know, that was one of those times where it's like more instead of a tap on the shoulder, it was like a smack in the back of the head, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I was just kind of frightened about it too. Like remember grabbing my phone, and I just needed to get the energy moving because I'm like, I wasn't listening to music. I was just kind of stunned and just feeling in a bad spot. And I remember just saying some stuff to my phone and just getting some of that stagnant energy moving. And it was really dark, like just how can I let myself get like this? I'm like, this is brutal. Like what am I doing with my life? I need help. How, why was I able to be sober before and now I can't do this? And, even like suicidal ideation and just the whole thing. And finally, after getting that out of my system, I just reached that point of like being so disturbed with my own behavior. And then, so I was able to combine those two things, just feeling so disturbed, but giving myself like a reason of why, that was beyond me. And was like, it felt like I was very, excuse me, in tune with, my family. And I felt that just having that like acknowledgement and that intention just released everything and really gave me that one of those 180, 180 shifts inside of me. I had that spiritual awakening, I guess, or spiritual, recalibration, we'll call it. And so, yeah, that's what it was. And since then it's been, as we talked about, a little over 3 years now, 3 years, 3 months. I actually surpassed that initial 3 years, 3 months, a couple days ago, actually. So at time of recording here. And, yeah, that's where I am. I'd love to talk about like what I've been doing since then. But before that, I just was a bar of audio there for you for like half an hour. So I want to give you a chance to say anything. If you have any follow-up questions, thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. I get so much from hearing other people's stories because there's just so much like commonalities and so many things that spark, and so it benefits me as much as like the guests to share. So I just want to thank you for
Mm.
sharing your story. And it just sounds like you've been through like a tremendous amount of different challenges and roadblocks, and like it's taken a lot to get to the point where you are, and that's huge to celebrate passing your personal best in the three
Mm.
years 3 months. That's massive.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. And you know what? It's like, I don't know. It's I have such a different perspective of all the different challenges, over the years.
Hmm.
Especially when I was younger, as I mentioned, when I was in it back then, I just felt like, man, this is like, is life going to get any better, or is this how
Yeah.
life is always going to be? And I felt very bleak at many different times. But honestly, I wouldn't trade any of these experiences. There's a great quote, and I'm bad at remembering the exact quotes, but it's something along the lines of somebody that has been associated or been close to their own death has a much more fulfilling life as a result
Yeah.
because they've been that far into like the darkness that they can
Yeah.
really appreciate. And I feel that way very much about my own life, where I can, it's not, I'm not too far removed from some pretty dark times that I can always access. They're still in there. And when I meditate and such, um, like I know where they are, and I know I allow them to be there, right? And I'd love to get into that about part of my healing and what I'm doing with everything now. But that's a big part of it. Whereas before, I spent pretty much my entire adulthood and childhood and everything, um, numbing, distracting, pushing, suppressing. If I get those little pangs like saying, "Hey, like you got to pay attention to this," I'd be like, "No, no, no, I'm just gonna check my phone now," right? And that's honestly, Alex, that's been like probably the last 2 years. I've been really paying attention to that. My default before was if I felt a little bit of loneliness or something, I'd be like, I'd pick up my phone, I'd check my email, I'd pick up my guitar. The guitar is much more, it's much less distracting. At least I'm still sort of tapping into that. But yeah, I did a lot of distraction, and still to this day, I got to be very, aware of when that happens because that is very much my default. But yeah, getting into what I'm doing now. So I'd literally been working that same job the same time. I shouldn't say same job. It's like the same company, but
Mhm.
many different excuse me, many different iterations of it. So the one thing with working with Save on Foods is I got to meet so many different people. I've been transferred as soon as I got into assistant store manager. It was like 6 or 8 months, and you'd get moved to a different store. So I think I went through like 8 stores in like 4 or 5 years, and I'm meeting like each store's got anywhere from like 80 to 120 people.
Wow.
So I'm really learning how to read people, work with people, mentor different people, work through confrontations with different people, being a point person, and being a destination person because people are coming to me. If I don't know what this is, I have to have the resources to be able to find out the answer. So it was a great experience for me, and I really enjoyed the mentoring because by that time it's like, man, this has literally been my life. Like I've started as a part-time closer in the bakery deli in College Heights and Prince George to like assistant store manager opening a brand new store here in Edmonton during the third wave of the pandemic in 2020. And I was like every point in between. I was like it was really cool to look back on. But at that stage I was not feeling fulfilled anymore. I was putting in my head. I was starting to do the justifications like we talked about with the drinking, with the job. I ended up taking a 6 month sabbatical last year under the guise that I'm like, okay, this will give me enough time to do a bunch of these things that I've always wanted to do. I'm turning 40. That was last summer, so I had my 40th birthday last August. So I'm like, perfect time to do it. I can identify that this happens a lot of times in people's lives. So you get to that stage where it's, it used to be called like a midlife crisis, but it's kind of like an existential crisis. Like I was really asking myself, like, why am I here? Like, why have I chosen to be sober? Like, there's a reason better than what I'm doing right now, in my opinion. And there's nothing wrong with, I want to say that too. Like, the further I'm getting removed from my career of 23 years, the more grateful I am for it. having said that, at the time, like that, it was just, there was a lot of friction with me.
Mhm.
So, and I was like, there's something to this. And I remember that morning one of my 6 month sabbatical, I woke up and I had one of these like distinct voices. It's not my inner dialogue. Like there was some other voice in there, it felt like. And it's like, you're not going back. And I'm like, interesting. I never thought of it like that yet, especially on morning one. I was like, that's really strange. I wonder where that voice came from. So, and then, a couple days later, I went on this massive nature walk and I had this like huge creative outburst and all these ideas that like I honestly don't even really know where they came from. Obviously, they were somewhere in there inside me, and luckily had my phone with me, and I was doing the same, like, okay, and I'm going to do this, and what if I blah blah blah, and just riffing on all these ideas, and I felt like this massive outpouring of creativity and of what I could do potentially, for the rest of my life and enjoy it. And so I started that. It was initially it looked like it was an online course that I started creating about like creativity. So the benefits of like music and art therapy, right? And tying it into a little bit, like I was starting to get into like art and music therapy for those with addictions. Like I had a lesson just on that. So I was kind of at that time sort of testing that out a little bit and trying that on for myself. And anyway, so I learned how to do video editing. There's all these learning curves, and I was like kind of in a race against time because I wanted to get this course out and hopefully just show myself that I could make some money on it, and then I could just quit the job outright. And it didn't quite work out that way. Looking back on it, everything happens as it needs to, right? So I ended up going back to Save on Foods, and it was tough. I was pretty emotional about it because part of me really didn't want to. And then part of me is like, you know what? This is a great way. Oh, fast forwarding a little bit. I ended up getting my first coaching certification in that leave of absence. I met a guy. I was on his podcast, and we ended up just really hitting it off. And he told me about this coaching program called Enlifted, and it's all about like the language we use and how powerful language can be, and just changing your inner dialogue around how powerful that can be with your goal setting, your mantras and such, and then how to apply that to with coaching as well. And so it was just amazing. That's what gave me that like that behind the scenes kind of credibility with myself, and just some like structure as far as like being able to be a coach. So I was going to be like a creativity coach, right? That was my thing. And yeah, so anyways, I ended up going back to work against, I kind of ran out of my resources, shall we say. I ran out of my money that I had saved away. So it was like, okay, you know what, this is going to be fine because this will be a chance for me to integrate the new me with the old me, and we'll see how this goes. I'm a brand new person now, so maybe this is actually the best thing that I can do right now. And like within a week or so, it was pretty apparent that it was very different world. I found that it was very challenging for me to remain this new person with these new energy, because it's almost like I was going back in time with it, and everything with that job. Like I'm 23 years in, close to it at that point. So I'm very reactionary, right? There's people that they'll say something, or the nature of retail, anybody that's worked retail, it is very reactionary by nature, right? There's like, okay, this person needs to talk to you, got to get this done. Somebody's calling you, a customer complaint to deal with. It's very like fractured, shattered work. So it was very challenging for me to integrate this new me, which is all about like breathing and thinking, taking the time to think about what you're saying and all this. And then it's like you're forcing that into this other way of doing things, and it wasn't working. The best thing I could say for advice for people is like, what worked for me is just picking like 10 minutes at a time and go, okay, for the next 10 minutes, I'm not going to use any soft talk words or any like statements of negation. I'm just going to speak in positives and just like not let anybody cross that line. That's how I'm going to present myself for the next 10 minutes. And I'd be able to do that. But for the full day, very, very challenging. By the end of the day, I'd be sarcastic, right? And participating in gossip and things of this nature. And then coming home just going, damn it, like, why, what's going on here? So that's how that part ended. I ended up having a great stint, one last stint as assistant store manager right before Christmas. And that was like, everything went really well. And the store wanted me to stay. And I was like, man, you know what? If it's like this, I probably could stay for at least a bit. But I knew it wasn't going to be long term. It would be 6 or 8 months, and then they'd send me somewhere else, and I'd be like in the same boat. So I said no, and I ended up going to a store that's like 5 minutes down the road, and I'd been there before. That was actually the store that I had opened in my dark days there as a bakery manager, where I'd had the whole fall down the stairs and all that. So it felt like I was closing a circle in a sense. So I thought it was cool, like to go back there and kind of like, and it was very apparent by shift number 1. By that time I'd stepped down. I was like a assistant grocery manager, and I was like, okay, so this is the overlap while I build up my coaching business. I'm just going to do this job. And by like halfway through the first shift, I'm like, no, this is just not for me, negation acknowledged. And what happened is like the timing of it was I graduated level 2 in lifted a few weeks into January, this past January. So a few months ago. And Mark England, who is the head coach, is such a like riveting presenter, and just the way that he presented the grad call for level 2, got me so jacked, and just like I saw my future. And I was just like, as soon as he finished, I was like emotional. I just sat there staring at my computer. He had already signed off, and I was just staring. And I'm like, I'm gonna quit tomorrow. This is what I'm going to do. No questions asked. Like I was just 100% sure of it. So I typed up my letter of resignation, had my back pocket, realized by the time I got there, I'm like, okay, no, there's still a few things I got to get in line here before I do that. So, and then anybody that's looking at becoming an entrepreneur, the best advice that I can give for that is make sure that your money is as tight and as your monthly expenses are as low as you can possibly get them. So that's what I did, because I had a very tough time with it on my sabbatical. I had to go through this whole like money story, like this money story that I had that I didn't even realize I had. So even though I'd saved the money to get me through the sabbatical, I'd been getting paid every Friday for over 20 years. And when that first Friday came, even though I was expecting it mentally, energetically, it was very strange. I looked at my bank statement, noticed I hadn't been paid. I was just like, ooh. And I felt it in my body. I'm like, ooh, what is that? That's strange. I wasn't expecting that at all. And for the full 6 months there, I still had quite a few monthly bills to pay. And I was just watching my bank account go down, 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 down. And that's where I had to like stop myself and go, so what is it about money? Because it's not money per se, but what is it that money is representing that I'm having a tough time with? And I identified it was definitely like self-worth. Like I didn't feel that I was, by being out of work, even though I was working my butt off on my sabbatical, I wasn't, relaxing like I said I was going to. I was working very hard, but I wasn't quote unquote, getting paid for it. Right. So I had this like, self-worth tied up with being paid. And I had a really bad bout of imposter syndrome. Like the whole time I had that sabbatical, just like who do you think you are? Like what makes you so much better than everybody else that works at Save On Foods that you can blah, blah, and all this stuff. And it was really strange to navigate. So I'm glad that I came across in Lifted, because we did a lot of work on victim mentality, imposter syndrome, and things like that. And so anyway, so that was kind of like the training wheels for me for this past January. I'm like, okay, I've already been through all that. I can do this. Like I've already felt what it's felt like to be. So yeah, back to the whole entrepreneurial advice is I knew what it felt like having my money get, draining on me. So I took what I had for my pension. They give you a lump sum, and then they give you the majority of it to roll into another RSP. I took some of the lump sum, paid off 12 months worth of bills that would normally be monthly bills annually. So I've given myself a full year of breathing room. And basically all that I'm paying for right now is like groceries and gas for my vehicle. And I'm not driving too much because I'm working from home. So that was big. And yeah, just since then, Alex, I've been doing it was the first time that I'd finally come out fully about my alcohol use. And that started pretty much right away. Like as soon as I got out of Save On Foods, I felt permission to be myself. I always felt like there was work Matt and true like artist Matt, we'll call him, because I'm the musician and I do like creativity and such. And it was always like I had like two personas, and they immediately just like enveloped or amalgamated or whatever the word would be as soon as I left there. And it was permission that I'm like, I don't have to worry about somebody at work finding out about this. And yeah. And then after that, I finally felt like, boom, okay, this is like how I was. Because even when I was on that leave of absence, I still was under the umbrella or under the, under the watchful eye of the company, really. Like they were expecting me to come back. I was expecting to go back. And so it was just like freedom. It was complete freedom, and it felt great. And then as a result, I was able to put myself out there as, okay, this is how I am. This is my issue that I'd had before. This is what I've worked through and for. And, initially I wanted to be like the life coach. I wanted to be everything to everybody. Initially, my first niche was like people that are like going through what I am, like going through like a career pivot, because there's a lot of people doing that too, right? People that want to bet on themselves. Like I was going to be like that, that kind of coach for people that want to get into their own business or just bet on themselves, basically, because there's such a cool energy, like that underdog energy. So that is initially what I started. But I found that even that was a little bit too vague and hard to explain. I ended up going through a business mentoring program that they said, when you're unknown, which at this point I am for the most part, find like as specific a niche as you can. And then it's like, okay, you're only going to appeal to like 5% of the people, but the 5% that you appeal to, you will very much appeal to, because they're going to be like, oh,
so
wow,
true.
like you are 100% speaking my language right now. So that's what I've gone. And I went through like, I tried on a few different hats though. And it came full circle back to just what I have life experience in,
Yeah.
and that's the sobriety coaching, recovery coaching. And so that's what I did. I went full bore into it. As soon as I identified that, it was April 1st, I remember. I launched the podcast Beyond Recovery, and I started getting into like the Reddit and Facebook and Instagram sobriety communities and networking and getting into people's I just networking that way, right? And and then just everything that I've learned with like sound therapy and like the coaching style that I have, the story work style of coaching and breath work and things of that nature. They do so wonderfully complement each other in this field of like sobriety and recovery. And man, it feels great to just be myself with it and come out with it. And it's given myself a whole other layer of accountability too, because now it's like there's no going back. Like before, when I was talking that 2012 sobriety stint, I think there was part of me that was hiding it under the guise that one day I could come back out and try it on again. And I did, and it didn't work. So with this now, it's like, it's very much, okay, I'm out with this. This is like my identity. And man, it's got some good weight to it too, like good weight, not like, pressure weight. Like it's got some substance to it, right? So, and that's kind of how that's how it feels now. Um, I've mentioned it on a few different podcasts, and I'm actually curious to see what you think of it too. Just the word authentic, because I guess it thrown out quite a bit. Like, be your authentic, say your truth and be your authentic self. And I was always like, I know what that word means, but like I don't know how it applies to me. And like people keep saying this, are they actually being authentic? Like there's some nuances to it, right? And changes depending on the person to person. So I started asking people like what's authentic to you, and getting some really crazy good answers, but very different answers as well. And what I've developed as far as what authenticity is to me is it's kind of like an energetic thing. Like I view it as like, if I'm speaking authentically to you, it's just like something like straight from my heart, and it's a straight line, like directly to you. It doesn't get caught on anything, like a persona or an ego. If it does get caught on like my ego or persona, it'll get fragmented, it'll get scattered, there'll be some distortion that comes off of it, because there might be some like an agenda, there might be, who knows, I might be trying to impress you, the different things. And then as a result, my message is no longer authentic. So that's kind of energetically how I view it. And a mentor of mine had also mentioned that, a really good way of saying, he's like, I don't know how to verbalize it exactly, but I know what kind of circumstances you need to be able to be authentic. I was like, oh, tell me. He's like, you need to feel safe. Like you need to feel, and that's why like the rooms are so important, like getting in there and realizing you don't need a persona. You don't need your ego. You can be yourself. And that safety creates the ability to be authentic. It's initially the work was, I viewed it to be very challenging to come to terms with some of these unresolved feelings. All of a sudden get like strangely emotional. Like I remember a couple weeks ago, I was just making breakfast and I just started tearing up. I got this like sense of loneliness, and I actually allowed it, instead of like, nope, hold on, let's turn on the TV or something. Not TV, but I grabbed my phone or whatever it is, and I allowed it, and I just started like just tearing up. And I'm like, just for a bit, I'm like, interesting. And I went back to making breakfast. So just allowing those things to come up and just dissolve. And you know, the meditation has been huge. Like the whole getting back to like the yin energy, like getting into yin yoga even. So yin
Hmm.
yoga, meditation, breath work. So that's a big difference from the first time had the sobriety stint where I had this like, I still had this feeling like I was missing that reckless night on the town, let's do this, blow off some energy. And I never re- found a way to resolve that. And I thought just, you know, doing more of the yang energy of just like the more achiever stuff, that was eventually going to just satiate that whole like feeling inside me. Or I'm like, maybe I need to join a martial art or something like that, which is, you know, I'm sure that would have helped as well. But I'm finding this time it's like the opposite energy, the yin energy, is actually, you know, resolving that the tension that I
Yeah.
had inside of me, which is like strange because it's like the opposite energy, right? I kept thinking I just had to keep pressing and keep doing more, and then eventually that would just leave, right? Or I would be like, okay, I'm satisfied now, when in fact it was the exact opposite energy of like taking some time to breathe and taking some time to journal and, you know, meditate. And, you know, the yin yoga where you're in a position for like 3 minutes and like you have to be with your thoughts for a while, things go so much smoother. I feel way more
Mhm.
balanced. And that would have been definitely would have been the advice to. And it's funny, I knew that, like I did know that, but it was like I didn't have time, quote unquote, to, you know, sit there and meditate for
Yeah.
like 20 minutes or half an hour. And I had a game changing meditation early in my, like right after I quit Save on Foods, because I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna actually do this meditation thing. And I used to do like 10, 15 minutes at a time, but I would do an hour at a time. And finally, this one time, it finally clicked for me. It was 35 minutes of, I had a blindfold on because otherwise my eyes start, you know, I'm very distractionary with my eyes. So nope, put the blindfold on, and I'm laying there in bed. And it was like probably half an hour of my brain going, like, what are you doing? Like, there's this to do. Like, you still have this. Like, you just quit your job. Like, you can't just afford to just sit here. Like, get up. And then finally, I had like that Eckhart Tolle moment. Like, I was aware of his books and I loved it, but I didn't quite know I'd never experienced it, right? What he talked about being like the witness. And I finally had that moment at about 35 minutes in where I was able to pull myself back and be like, okay, who is that? Who is that voice that's saying that? And I was actually able to like
Yeah.
observe the voice. And then it was kind of funny. I'm like, okay, well, that you can keep saying that. That's all good. And I'm just going to stay here. And then it was actually quite humorous for me. And then after that, I was like, okay, I get this now. But it took me, you know, that amount of time and having, the thing is like, as soon as you experience it and you have like a, you know, you can read it all you want, but until you actually experience, until I experienced it, it was just kind of one of those things. I'm like, oh, one day I'll get into meditation. And now I have. And it's like, man, what a game changer it's been.
That's so amazing. And it's so incredible to think like how you got to that point. And there's so many things that I can relate to in this part of your journey. Like I've also left my job, and um that like letting go of the familiar and being able to kind of trust in um trust that you're following your purpose and you're on the right path, and then just being able to let go of that whole idea of like, I can so relate to, I can't afford to be taking a break right now. I have to be like working all the time, but it's in those moments of break where you usually get the most insight.
100%. Yeah, I'm definitely finding that. Like the best, exactly, the best,
Mhm.
the most aha moments I have. Like, don't get me wrong, I get some when I'm out, when I'm out, doing something and just kind of pounding away and grinding away. You're gonna make incremental improvements, and you can't teach experience. So you got to, for me, I choose to, immerse myself in an activity until I get through the learning curve. So there's something to be said for that. But as far as absolutely to your point, like as far as like problem solving or just that intangible,
Mhm.
things like life advice. Um, Absolutely, you can't find that anywhere else other than I find that I get that a lot from like a good night's sleep. So yeah, it's those moments like the meditation and sleep that give you like the more of the intangible, whereas like the yang energy I think is more for the tangible, like the skill acquisition and all that, right? But
Yeah.
the challenging thing for me that I'm practicing every day is definitely getting the balance between the two
Yeah.
energies, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's been so amazing to hear your story. And I'm just
Thank you.
wondering if you had any wisdom or advice for someone who's starting out their sober journey, what would you say?
Ooh, yeah, yeah. Always like this question. Good question to end off. So the main thing for me, as my part of the story and the advice I would give to anybody that's anywhere in their recovery, but especially starting off, would be you know, stay connected, right? There's a great TED Talk video that has, I don't think it's the title, but you can Google it. It'll come up. It's a big part of the TED Talk, and it's something along the lines of like the opposite of addiction is not recovery, it's connection.
Uh-huh.
And I
That's
remember like
Johan Hari.
right, yes, yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. So as soon as I saw that, like the like I Googled it, or I was Googling like TED Talks, and that one came up, and I read that. I was like, whoa, that's crazy. And then I watched the TED Talk, and I was just like, man, game changer. So that was huge for me. And then after that is like, okay, I totally understand that. And that's like a huge part of my story. If you remember the whole AA meeting, and that's what it is. It's like, I tried so hard and so many times to do it by myself because I'm like, in shame, or like I wanted to do it in hiding discreetly. Right. But you really don't have to. Like in fact, I highly encourage that you find a connection, and there's many different layers, whatever you're comfortable with, because there's like online communities. We talked about Instagram, Facebook, even Reddit. If you're not comfortable putting pictures of yourself
Mhm.
out, Reddit has an amazing sobriety community. And of course, in person is very easy to find meetings, AA meetings or support group meetings. And man, they make all the difference in the world. And it just shows, for me, I always like using this story. So, like when I got into AA meetings initially, I didn't share. I was always nervous about sharing. And when I would share out of the group context with a one on one, if somebody said, "Hey, what's your story?" I'd be very like careful, like kind of, oh yeah, and I was like, like whispering it, right, and being shameful and being like fearful about putting it out, and then oftentimes it would be greeted with the person across from me be like, oh, that's nothing. That was like my Wednesday morning, and then I would just like have this moment of like permission to have that shame turn into like
Mhm.
laughter, and it would just like, what a beautiful way to like resolve yourself of all this shame that
Mhm.
like, oh man, like, I've been holding on to for years. And then somebody across from me is like, oh, I wouldn't worry too much about that. It's like, I did that every day, and it's just like, man, it's what a release. And that's what you get from connecting with places like this. And yeah, it's just recovery people are amazing. Like when you have a conversation with somebody that has had, like you were talking about, the similar experiences, there's a lot of
Yeah.
overlap, but then there's a lot of change and nuance to everybody's story too, right? It's man, it's just, if it totally feels like, again, that safety, that ability to be yourself. And the things that I dare say, I mean, for me especially, the things that I always wanted, that I thought alcohol was providing me, is being provided by the recovery community, right? So me being
100%.
able to be myself, me being able to speak my truth,
Mhm.
love myself, be loved unconditionally, right?
Yeah.
Is found in that. So it's such a, yeah, that would be my number one piece of advice. Stay connected. And don't just try and do it with the white knuckle thing. It's great to have willpower. White knuckling is, you know, it's a good thing to have in your toolkit if you can do the if you can have the discipline and all that, but very, very challenging to do by yourself and with discipline alone. And it's just so much funner with it. It's like an adventure. It feels like a journey when you're doing it with a bunch
Yeah.
of people too, right? So that
It's
would be
so
my
true.
piece of advice for sure.
Oh, amazing. Well, Matt, thank you. I want to thank you so much for coming on the
Mm.
show. Your story's so inspiring, and I know that anyone who listens to it will take different wisdom from it and learn a lot. So I really appreciate you sharing your story with our community.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Thanks to all your listeners, and thanks to you, Alex, for having me on. I very much enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I will put the links in the podcast description to all of Matt's information, to his social links and his show so that if anyone's listening and wants to reach out, you can connect with him as well.
Absolutely. No, that sounds great. I'm definitely looking forward to having you on my show. So any of listeners of your show, that will be coming soon, and we'll definitely provide you with those links when they come out too.
Amazing. Awesome. All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Hi, friend. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Sober Yoga Girl podcast. This community wouldn't exist without you here, so thank you. It would be massively helpful if you could subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast so it can reach more people. If we haven't met yet in real life, please come get your 1-week free trial of the Sober Girls Yoga membership and see what we're all about. Sending you love and light wherever you are in the world.